North to south, coast to coast, and around the world, this is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Welcome to the broadcast. Good to have you here. A little bit late this morning because I was so wrapped up in what I was doing from a standpoint of show prep that I was just peacefully minding my own business, looked up at the clock and said, oh, wow, I'm 40 seconds late. So welcome to the broadcast. Good to have you here. What is going on? I am so glad that you asked that question. Actually, Ron DeSantis is currently speaking before the Homeschoolers Convention. We should take a look. Let's see what Ron DeSantis is talking about as he has begun his presidential campaign. Ron DeSantis from Florida.
This society would answer that question for all of human history. When Dr. Benjamin Franklin was walking out of the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, he was approached on the street and asked, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a republic or a monarchy? His response was, a republic if you can keep it. Franklin and the founders understood you could have the best constitution in the world, you could have the best Declaration of Independence in the world. These things do not run on autopilot. They require citizens to be dedicated to constitutional principles and be dedicated to the cause of freedom. And that may mean you put on the uniform of your country like I have and go and serve overseas. And many people have given the last full measure of devotion in service to our country. It may just mean that you're engaged in your community as a parent, taking an interest in your kids' education, taking an interest in school board. There's a whole host of ways that you can uphold these core principles. I believe the survival of the American experiment requires a revival of true American principles. You are part of that revival. You give us hope.
Remember, he's talking to homeschoolers.
That our next generation will carry the torch of freedom. You cannot, if you look at the decline in the corruption of education throughout our country, you cannot look at that as any other thing other than posing a mortal threat to the viability of a free society. What you're doing is fighting back against that. What we're doing in Tallahassee by empowering parents, by providing curriculum transparency, by fighting gender ideology and CRT and elevating civics, we are doing our part to ensure that freedom survives into the future. Florida is doing it right. Florida is taking on the key issues head on. So much easier to just sit there like a potted plant and not want to get involved in these issues because people fire at you when you take a stand. Heck, a lot of these Republicans are out there saying that we should cave to Disney and give them corporate welfare. Not on my watch, that's not happening. So we're doing it right, and I think you're doing your part as parents and as educators to preserve what the founding father of our country, George Washington, called the sacred fire of liberty. This is a fire that burned in Independence Hall in 1776 when 56 men pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor so that they could establish a new nation conceived in liberty. It's the fire that burned at a cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, when the nation's first Republican president pledged this nation to a new birth of freedom. It's a fire that burned in the bosoms of a merry band of brothers who stormed the beaches of France, defeated Nazi Germany, and saved freedom throughout the world. It's a fire that burned at the foot of the Berlin Wall in the late 1980s when a very resolute president stood in front of that wall and said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, and brought communism to an end. This is a responsibility we have to carry that torch. It's not a responsibility we should shirk. It's a responsibility that we should welcome, because if not us, who? And if not now, when? So I'm proud of what you're doing to carry on this sacred fire of liberty. You can always count on the support of the state of Florida to support the rights of parents to choose the proper education for their children. And I don't think you can find a state that's done more in this country in our lifetimes to support education and the greater cause of liberty than we right here in the state of Florida. But I can tell you this, I have only begun to fight Thank you all. God bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That is Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, a rousing speech before a homeschoolers convention, and he is walking off stage to the adulation of the crowd. Homeschoolers, as you know, are essentially having a much larger part of American education than they ever have, and the reasons are obvious. Not only are they obvious, in a lot of people's minds, it's essential. Because teachers, and you can listen to a whole bunch of people and tell you that you don't have a problem, there's nothing wrong, nothing is happening, so on and so on. Okay. But people are taking their kids out of school. People are taking their children out of school. And why are they taking their children out of school? Because they don't like what's happening in school. And at some level, you can't just say, fine, go ahead and go. Get on out of here. Sometimes at some level you can't do that, and that's what's happening right this very moment. What does it say about an entire profession? What does it say about an entire profession where it's not just acceptable, it's not just being done, it's actually providing an invaluable service to society, that people are teaching their own kids at home. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from homeschooling parents. Okay? But where are the professionals here? The professionals are absent. Homeschooling parents are, in their minds, doing a better job educating their kids. And when you start talking about standardized testing, suddenly homeschooled kids are running circles around public school kids in homeschool in standardized testing, which is why there's an attack on standardized testing. Oh, those tests don't mean anything. Nah, they don't have anything to do with anything. No, that's not true. It's a very simple thing. This idea that you can't teach to the test. Yes, you can. As a matter of fact, that's what you do. You do teach to the test. That's the point. That's called education. Because the test, in a theoretical standpoint, where you're checking off boxes and writing essays and doing things on a test paper, at some point become reality. And the test is what you can actually do with that knowledge that you have learned, that you got an A on that test paper for, and now you have to put into practice without getting anyone killed. And public schools aren't just doing that. Everybody says, you know what? All these politicians are talking about public schools and public schools and public schools, and they send their kids to private schools. Why? Why do they send their kids to private schools? Private schools do not have the budget that public schools have. They just don't. There's all the money in the world for public schools. Why are private schools better than public schools? I'll tell you why. For the same reason that a lot of people believe that homeschoolers are better than public schools as well. Because the educational curriculum is different. The curriculum in the American public school system has been poisoned by politics. It's supposed to be about facts. And until you get to about being a junior in high school, you don't really start dealing with, okay, how can you use these facts? You just don't do it. You just get facts. Here's the fact. Do you understand the fact? Here's the reason, the explanation, and so on and so forth for the fact. Here's the test. Doggone it, you got it right. You get the fact. Then you get into like junior high school, senior in high school. Then you start learning how to actually use those facts. And then that continues in college, if you go. And that's not what we're doing. We're not teaching facts. We're teaching fancy. We're teaching political ideology instead of actual facts. Yesterday, for example, we were doing a history thing. We were doing this history thing. We were talking about the Emancipation Proclamation regarding reparations. By the way, reparations back in the news today. So what ends up happening is that we find out that after the end of the Civil War, towards the beginning of the Civil War, there was an order given by William Tecumseh Sherman called Field Order 15. That is the origin of 40 Acres and a Mule. Then we find out that after the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, that the next president, Andrew Johnson, rescinded Field Order number 15. And everybody goes, oh my God, see, the Republicans got rid of slavery and then got rid of reparations. Except that's not the case. Because Andrew Johnson was a Southern Democrat. Did you know that? Do you have any idea about that? Did you know that President Andrew Johnson, was a Democrat? It was a unity ticket between Lincoln and Johnson. One Republican, one Democrat. Did you know that? No. Why didn't you know that? Well, because Democrats are in charge of the curriculum. And Democrats want you to think that the Republican Party is racist. And how do you make successful propaganda? It's not what you add. It's what you leave out. And so all these people are talking about, well, now wait a minute then, how come the Republicans are standing for these Confederate statues? For the same reason the Democrats want to memorialize social tragedy instead of something uplifting and great about America. Leftists like to memorialize tragedy and mistakes. The reason why Republicans are defending Confederate statues is because a lot of Confederates want to continue rubbing the nose of the Southern Democrats who put them up in their own racism. They are monuments to the racism of Southern Democrats. It's also, by the way, American history. Those people who ignore history are condemned to repeat it. So Ron DeSantis, getting his campaign going, a rousing speech, well received, and reported on here on the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. I want to thank you very much for being a part of our broadcast today. Thank you for being here. And we will be back coming up in just a couple of seconds. Sorry about being 40 seconds late. Back in a moment here on the Wells Report. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. And so the public education thing, vis-a-vis homeschool and private school and so on, and school choice. Look, you know, you can say, I took my kids out of public school because they were being taught CRT, and teachers will say, no, CRT is not being taught. And I'm saying if it walks like CRT and it quacks like CRT and it indoctrinates like CRT, it's CRT. You can call it anything you want. But that's not even the issue. That's not the issue. You know, that is, by the way, a misdirection. That's a distraction from the reality. You know, everybody's talking about, CRT, no CRT, yes CRT, yeah, indoctrination, education, blah, 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 blah. What they're forgetting is the reality. What is the reality? The reality is that people are rejecting public school in greater numbers than ever before. We spend billions upon billions upon billions of dollars every single year on public school, and people are walking away. Arguing about the reasons why people are walking away really are immaterial. People are taking their kids out of public school. And what's public school doing? Well, they're blaming the parents. What they're doing is they're throwing roadblocks in front of homeschoolers. They're throwing roadblocks in front of their kids. This is an organization, public schools and public school unions and so on and so forth. Randy Weingarten, geez. All these people are supposed to be, well, we're here for the children. No. We're here for the children who comply. That's another reason why people are walking away from public schools. And this, by the way, is exactly why people reject socialism in all of its forms, because at the very heart of it all, public schools are socialist. It is a social experiment. It is a socialist endeavor. Right down to equal outcome. It's awful. And people are walking away from it. And that's the problem. You better solve the problem or public schools are going to go the way of all things. And you know how I know that? Because I used to live in New Orleans. The public schools in New Orleans are so bad. Anyone who can afford to get their kids out of public schools, get their kids out of public schools. Nearly all the children living in New Orleans go to a private school because the public schools are awful. And there's no point, there is no reason for it, no excuse. It certainly isn't money. It certainly isn't wages. Although teachers, you're part of this wonderful union, that says, well, we need teachers and we need educators and we need administrators. Teachers are educators. We don't need another layer of jobs so that the union gets more dues. Get rid of educators. Because teachers are educators. Find a school district that has a smaller number of administrators, paper pushers. Find a school district that actually cares about the kids and actually wants to train the kids and teach the kids fact, not political fancy. But it's hard to find, isn't it? Sure is. Hard to find. That's why people are walking away. Public schools are failing. And they better stop. Or they're going to be talking about how these dumb parents don't have any idea what they're talking about. Right up until they don't have jobs. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to The Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Our nation is in the grip of a poisonous political atmosphere. It permeates nearly everything in society, our news, our public discourse, our schools, our institutions. This pollution of the American experience for the sake of politics is tearing us to pieces because that's its aim. Its aim is to divide and conquer, thus being able to conquer. And it works, and it's working. And in doing so, we, the people of the United States, have lost control of the republic that Ben Franklin brought up to us that Ron DeSantis was talking about. We've given you a republic for as long as you can keep it. And it's under attack. And for the narrowest of reasons. The narrow reason is political power. That's it. It's degenerate. It's pathological. It always defeats itself. Political power is always swept aside by reality. But that doesn't mean that these people don't keep trying. And so we find ourselves in a situation where our free press, as enumerated in the Constitution of the United States, is playing politics instead of reporting the news. They've forgotten what they're doing. They are too permeated with the poison of politics. And so when we have a story like I have in front of me at this particular moment, when I have it here and so on, the circumstance is as follows. You want to say, yeah, and you want to ignore the reality because that's what the mainstream media does. They want to get you inspired or get you motivated or what have you to a political purpose in this case because the free press is political. So here we go. This from Fox News. CNN delivered horrible news for President Biden as the network's latest polling offered a grim forecast ahead of his 2024 re-election bid. The poll released yesterday showed a whopping 66% of Americans, 2/3, view a Biden victory in the upcoming presidential election as either a disaster or a setback for the United States. Horrible news, horrible for Joe Biden, said CNN anchor Jake Tapper as he reacted to the poll on CNN. Those are some bad numbers. CNN political director David Chalian provided analysis of the poll that showed 41% of Americans specifically called a Biden win in 2024 a disaster. Another 26% of Americans viewed a Biden win as a setback. Both front runners were tied, and they're also talking about Trump here, but I'm bringing that Trump information in just a couple of minutes for a reason. The front runners were tied at 27% among those who call each of their wins a step forward. And then there's more. Yeah, it's worse for Biden. Most Americans think electing him would be a disaster or a setback for the country. The current Democrat and Republican frontrunners. This is not an election the American people want. That is an assertion based on this data. Now let's talk a little bit about the data. Now this is from Fox News. Fox News is biased, as we know. Fox News is trying to convince Republicans not to re-elect Donald Trump because it's bad for the Republican Party in the mind of Fox News. This is biased. In other words, Fox News is working to the detriment of Donald Trump instead of reporting the flipping story and leaving it at that. So in other words, they're just like CNN, just on the other side. So listen to this. 41% of Americans specifically called a Biden win in 2024 a disaster. And then they say this is Fox News, a slightly better figure than the 44% who said the same thing about former President Trump. In other words, according to this poll, 44% of Americans believe that the second term for President Trump would be a disaster. And then we come up with this. 26% of Americans viewed a Biden win as a setback. 12% said the same about a Trump win. In other words, 12% of this polling, they believe that it would be a setback for the nation if President Trump won. Both frontrunners were tied at 27% among those who call each of their wins a step forward, but Trump held a 10-point lead over Biden among those who would call it a triumph. Now, these are subjective terms. Now, why am I bringing up all this stuff? I will be more than happy to tell you why I'm bringing up all this stuff. I'm bringing up all this stuff because this is polling. We know about polling in the United States. Polling is used as a political lever by a political free press that is political and nothing more. It's no longer an honest broker of fact, information, the first draft of history. It is a political stenography service / public relations firm for the various parties. In other words, it's unreliable, just as these polls are. And you're saying, John David, you keep trying to find some way of standing up for President Biden. I'm not standing up for President Biden. I'm standing up for facts and fairness. Now, in my own personal opinion, the idea that 41% of Americans call a potential Biden win in 2024 a disaster is reasonable. And then they go on to say, and this is Fox News, a slightly better figure than the 44% who said the same thing about former President Trump. According to this survey, 44% of Americans believe that another Trump candidacy, another Trump presidency would be a disaster for the nation. Do you believe that's true? Well, let's look at what the presidents both did. Arguably, President Biden did things more detrimental to the country than President Trump. Which of those presidents do you believe is a better president? Which of those presidents do you believe has done more for the betterment of the nation? I doubt very sincerely that 44% of Americans believe that a 2024 win for President Trump would be a disaster for the nation. Now, that's what the survey says. So where's the fact? The facts are absent in surveys. They can only be interpretations, assertions, opinions. That's why they're called opinion surveys. Now, do I believe in broad terms that the Biden administration has been damaging to the nation? Yes. Do I believe in broad terms the Trump administration was not as damaging or even damaging to the United States of America? Yes. These are just my opinions. Do I believe that a Biden win in 2024 would be at least a setback? Since I don't like to use florid terms like disaster. Yes, I believe it would. Do I believe that a Trump win in 2024 would be a disaster or a setback for the nation? Absolutely not. I don't. But that's just my belief. My situation is as follows. I look at all this and I'm going, okay, well, how do you tell the people watching this broadcast what's real and what's not? Just as the polling information that we were assured was accurate against Donald Trump, for Hillary Clinton, against Donald Trump, for Joe Biden, so on and so forth, absolutely accurate. We knew it wasn't. We knew it wasn't accurate. We also know that all the polling that was done during the Trump administration, not accurate. So polling in the United States is not accurate. That means that just because you get a result, say, for example, if you're a Trump supporter, that you get a result that President Biden is struggling, approval down to 35%. If he doesn't stop, he's going to get into the 20s. And this, by the way, points out the flaw in the idea that leftists can rely on the mainstream media to protect them from their own mistakes. Because less and less people are watching mainstream media news. Less and less people are believing that the Democrat Party has anything to offer the American experience except socialism. Fewer and fewer Americans are playing the game being dictated by these people in charge of the mainstream media and all of the things on it. One is destroying the other, and the other is destroying the one. There's a statement out there that says iron sharpens iron. Well, it also can annihilate it. And that's what's happening. It's annihilation here. This is a downward spiral to disaster. Everybody is so upset about the horrifying terribleness of people trying to interfere with our election process, trying to warp political thought, or the people's thought for political effect, interfering with American elections. The government of the United States is interfering with political elections all the time. The mainstream media is especially bad for that. They do it all the time. They believe it's their job to interfere with elections. And so it is essential that you remember that these polls are not accurate. They can give you a broad sense. Like, for example, 71% of Americans, I heard it quoted yesterday as 75%, but that was on Fox News. I think it's 71% of Americans believe that the country's on the wrong track. In general terms, I agree. A lot of people are frustrated with President Trump. I don't necessarily agree with them, but I certainly do agree with the fact that they're frustrated with President Trump. So that's, in general terms, that's right. A lot of people believe that Joe Biden is too old and too infirm to be the president of the United States. And that, of course, gives rise to the question, well, who's running the country? Nobody elected. That's who's running the country. No one who was elected to the post of president of the United States is running the country. That's just my opinion. But in broad terms, is there reality there? Sure. So when you start talking about these percentages, well, 44% believe this and 41% believe that, and there's this and there's that and that and this, and this means that and that means this, it's all assertion. It's all a point. It's all opinion. I'm one for breaking things down into simple, indisputable, if not indisputable, unassailable facts. I believe the facts are very plain and the people of the United States don't like the direction their country's going. That's people of all political stripes. I believe that most Americans believe that Donald Trump, though old, let me rephrase that. I believe that I was talking about Biden in my head. Most people believe that Joe Biden is too old. That's probably true and probably too infirm to be the president of the United States. Some people think that President Trump is too old. I agree. I don't agree necessarily with the idea that Trump is too old because there are different ages, different kinds of being in the 70s. But I do believe that there are people who think he's too old and we need fresh blood, whatever that is. Everybody says that Ron DeSantis is a very strong candidate. He absolutely is a very strong candidate, but he's also a machine politician. Do we need more machine politicians, especially machine Republican politicians who talk a really good game, just like we saw with Ron DeSantis, but are real short on getting things done? I have my thoughts. You have yours. But don't take this polling as gospel, because it isn't. Does President Biden have a serious problem getting reelected to the presidency in 2024? Yes. Should he step aside? Absolutely yes. For the sake of the country, for the sake of his legacy, for all our sakes. This is the Wells Report. Back with more in just a moment. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Elsewhere in the news, it has been announced that Special Counsel John Durham will testify before the House Judiciary Committee about his report in June of this year. The hearing will happen on Wednesday, June 21st. The Wells Report will cover it like a blanket. And the reason we're going to cover it like a blanket is coming up. Durham found out that the Department of Justice and FBI failed to uphold their mission of strict fidelity to the law when it launched the Trump-Russia campaign investigation. The FBI's original investigation, known as Crossfire Hurricane by some overly dramatic idiot in the FBI who named it, looked into whether the Trump campaign coordinated with Russia to influence the 2016 presidential election. The 300-page report to the Justice Department said his investigation also revealed senior FBI personnel displayed a serious lack of analytical rigor toward the information they received, especially information received from politically affiliated persons and entities. This information is in part triggered and sustained Crossfire Hurricane and contributed to the subsequent need for Special Counsel Mueller's investigation. In particular, there was significant reliance on investigative leads provided for or funded directly or indirectly by President Trump's political opponents. This is bad. And it goes on and on and on. And now John Durham is going to testify June 21st. We will be covering it. And why are we going to be covering it? You didn't cover the January 6th hearings? No, I didn't cover the January 6th hearings because they were one-sided, edited, cherry-picked, made-for-TV concoctions. I don't report on the ravings of a lynch mob. I report the news. Well, how does that work out with the Durham report and John Durham coming and testifying? Then my dog barked. Well, here's how. Here's how it does. The simple case of the matter is that there are people on the House Judiciary Committee that think that John Durham is the biggest jerk in show business. The Democrats on that committee will have an opportunity to ask questions in the light of day, questions that will attack John Durham and his report. In other words, both sides will be represented, and therefore, I will report it. I believe in fact and fairness. I don't believe in political ravings. I believe in news. Excuse me just a second. Odin, shut up! Hi. So let me get to the chat room where everybody else is talking. Let's see. Here we go. Oh, we were talking a little bit about once again reparations yesterday, and Isaac, who's a history teacher, talks about his interpretation of fact that I bring him. And right up to and including quoting Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution after he admonished me to go deeper into my research. So I went to the document. And he goes, yep, that's what's wrong with America. You refuse to go deeper into the intent of the clause. You mean your understanding of the intent of the clause, correct? No. What I went to was the clause. I happen to believe that one of the most egregious problems with the United States of America at this particular moment, especially in our public schools since we started our broadcast with that, is that one of the classes that is required for every student in the United States is 17th century English, specifically constitutional English, so that people know what a big S is. So people have some idea of why it looks like Congress of the United States as opposed to Congress. Well, that's a big S. What is that? Well, that was a grammar rule from years ago during the Constitution. Hang on just a minute, okay? Okie dokie. I'll explain later. So when we don't have constitutional English, what we don't have is we don't have a way to actually go and look at the Constitution and understand more about what it's saying. The Constitution of the United States provided that all other persons, slaves, would be held into account when it came to the first apportionment of delegates to the House of Representatives. It's been morphed over the years for political reasons, in other words, warped, tormented, twisted for the sake of politics, to create some sort of grievance. I go back to the words. I go back to the document. I read the English because I care about constitutional language. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a couple of moments. Hour number 2 around the corner. Our telephone number 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. This is the Wells Report. Okay, I got to go talk to the guy that was blowing up my phone. I'll be right back right after this. Thanks for listening to the Wells Report, more of which continues in 6 minutes. You found the Wells Report, more of which continues in 5 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. North to south, coast to coast, around the world. This is the Wells Report. Greetings, my name is John David Wells. We report the news honestly and fairly. We analyze the news. Hold on a second. Yeah. We analyze the news for fact and bias. We point out both. We make commentary, which is opinion and is not the news. It's just what we think. You and me, and so we debate. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. I'm John David Wells, as I said. So let's spend a little bit of time on that debate thing. There are two ways you can do it. One's the chat room that you can find on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch. And the other is the telephone, 817-379-2172. You can do that, okay? All right, so here's what we've got here. We were talking a little bit about the Constitution of the United States and how I believe that the Constitution speaks for itself. The Federalist was a collection of essays written by the people who wrote the Constitution to explain it. That is a rich source of intent. But what has happened is that not only has the original document been warped out of reasoned recognition, so has the Federalist, also known as the Federalist Papers, because they've been interpreted for political effect, as opposed to being available for people in the United States to be able to read for themselves. Oh, make no mistake, you can find a copy of the Constitution of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, blah, 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 blah. But what you can't find is you can't find a simple, easy-to-understand book on constitutional English. Maybe I should write it. No, that's a profit center. I just realized I was talking about somebody doing something that I should be doing myself. Anyway, let's keep rolling. So what we have here is we have an inability in the United States to actually know what these people were talking about. Well, now, wait a minute, John. It's not that much different. Well, no, but it's been altered by history. For example, what does the word inalienable mean? Here, let's look it up. Inalienable. 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 inalienable, unable to be taken away or given away by the possessor. Okay, inalienable. Did you know what it meant before I read the definition? How about this word? Unalienable. In other words, there are no liens that can be put against this promise from the Constitution or from, in this case, this was the Declaration of Independence, from God to the people. Unalienable rights. In other words, man cannot create law that takes these rights away as they are given by God. You see, this is where interpretation starts being a mess. Give you another one. Isaac says, most Americans believe Trump incited an insurrection, and Trump lawyers are negotiating with the DOJ to avoid indictments. That's one way of looking at it if you want to. First of all, it's not that most Americans believe that Trump incited an insurrection. It's that the mainstream media reports that most Americans believe Trump incited an insurrection. Those are two different things. Those are two different things. I guarantee you 74 million people that voted for Donald Trump don't think he incited an insurrection. Anybody that knows English, they don't believe that Donald Trump incited an insurrection. Donald Trump did everything he possibly could as president of the United States to stop any problems on the day of the Electoral College confirmation. Who was it that turned down the National Guard troops? Yeah, that was Nancy Pelosi. She didn't like the idea. She didn't like the optics of it. No, because she was looking forward to the optics of having people running around in the Capitol building, burning things and shooting off fireworks and and putting lasers in police officers and getting the Capitol Police in a building and then trying to set it on. Oh, wait, that never happened. That never happened. 138 special investigations into BLM rioting through the summer of 2020. 23,000 against the people on January 6th. Yeah. So anyway, there are two concepts here. Most Americans believe that Trump incited an insurrection. That's not real. What is real is the media reports that most Americans believe that Trump incited an insurrection. Those are two different things. Jenny says, I think that Trump needs to chill. He was a great president, kept his promises, but not very presidential, huh? If President Trump wants to be the president of the United States again, he's going to have to start acting like it. Let's see. And then Isaac Tate, in kind of a passive-aggressive sort of way, says, I agree. The mainstream media did attempt to intervene in the election. We were discussing the warpage of news coverage of the 2020 election, the 2016, 2020, and by the way, already happening now in 2024, the 2024 election. They are working to influence the election. And then Isaac says, Fox News lied about Dominion and stole elections. That was after the election, not before. Let's see. Republicans better get behind DeSantis. Trump lost the 2020 election midterms and will lose the 2024 election. You sure about that? Sure, just your opinion. Poker Monkey says Isaac is always entertaining here. Well, that's one of the reasons why I like him being here. So anyway, that's when we got into the conversation regarding that. Let's see, who else? Hillary, Obama, Comey, all of their minions belong in prison just for the Russia hoax alone, not including all of the other criminal acts. Yeah. Yeah, sure. Durham testifying. Anybody want to bet that he has a heart attack or some other medical demise prior? Wouldn't that be awful? Wouldn't that just be terrible? Something about Antonin Scalia passing away. But let's just say, yeah, it's just a coincidence. Let's see what else. The writers of the clause intent JD, you can't handle a fact. Wait a minute. Intent isn't fact. The fact is that the writers put it on paper. Their intent is not on paper. Therefore, it is your assertion of fact. In other words, what you believe their intent to be. Frankly, I like looking at the words as printed on page, seeing it for myself, trusting my interpretation, as opposed to the mainstream media's or some biased left-wing either politician or voter. I have to make these decisions ourselves. I have to make them myself. Let's see what else. The simple question, could slaves vote? Nope, they couldn't. They could not vote in the House of Representatives or anyplace else, but they were represented in the House of Representatives. It's completely correct. That is that. And nobody knows that. And nobody talks about it. Why? Because we're trying to stain the United States, already stained by racism and slavery. We're trying to stain it further. We're trying to intensify the stain and the stench for political effect today. Somehow trying to convince the country that reparations are essential based on people who were never slaves, being paid by people who never were slave owners. End of story. Close the book. Move on. Let's see. Were women allowed to vote? Not until the 20th century. That's right. And the country's gone to hell ever since. I'm just playing. I'm just playing. Let's see what else. Isaac says that 81 million people in America believe that Donald Trump incited an insurrection. Really? You sure of those numbers? I'm not. I am not sure of those numbers. And I'm going to be very interested to see just exactly what those numbers are in the 2024 election. I want to see somebody with 81 million votes and what they can do in the second election. That's what I want to see. Let's see. What else? Oh, they crapped on the floor and smeared it on the walls. Yeah, that's a lot worse than trying to lock up a police station and burning the police officers inside. Yeah, that's awful. Yeah. Let's see what else. Anyway, so that's the debate. But what is not debatable is the following. The mainstream media, and let's get back to broad terms. The mainstream media is biased. It's biased left in general. That which is not biased is biased right. That which is not biased left is biased right. So it's all biased. Except for this broadcast. One, because I'm not worried about being able to maintain a reputation of being right to the point where I will lie to protect it. I don't mind looking like an idiot. Right? I don't mind getting it wrong. I look it up. That's all there is. Because this is about truth and it's about solutions. So what we have is a country that is being torn asunder by politicians for political effect. We have the hypocrisy of twisting even this particular topic. The hypocrisy of people standing up with fiery notions and ideas and demagoguery for the sake and plight of black people in the United States, but will practice the worst kind of racism against people who are black who disagree with them. It's awful. I believe Clarence Thomas called it a high-tech lynching. It still goes on to this day. And it's attempted more often than it's successful, thankfully. Let's see what else we got here. You're listening to the Wells Report. Speaking of reparations and speaking of people that are actual true victims of Democrat racism, we will get to that coming up next on the Wells Report. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. 817-379-2172. Stop asking. It's Friday. It's the Memorial Day weekend. It is beginning, or for some people, has already begun. By the way, I have a program note about Memorial Day Monday that I'll bring to you in just a couple of moments. You are listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. God bless all y'all. And we'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. I like that music. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. Chat room is buzzing, and I hope you do that too. In other words, I hope you join the chat room and buzz along with the rest of us. Let's see. What? They smoked weed in the Capitol building. The January 6th insurrection, they smoked weed. You mean they smoked weed in the very building where people have discussed legalizing marijuana? As a matter of fact, they passed bills legalizing marijuana. So what's the buzz, cuz? And by the way, smoking weed in the Capitol, first, it's never ever happened before. And two, okay, where does that fall in the spectrum of miscreancy? Excuse me. When miscreancy, when compared to shining a laser beam in a police officer's eyes. Better or worse? I think a little bit of weed being smoked in the Capitol building is a lot less bad than trying to blind a police officer. Okay. So speaking of reparations and people who are victimized by racists because of the color of their skin, conservatives are telling Black Americans not to believe Democrats promising reparations, but they are being manipulated in a cynical bait and switch for voters. I would tell every Black American who believes that Democrats will come up with a policy that will solve all their problems, that money will solve all their problems, to dig into history. This is Carol Swain. Carol Swain is someone who was a Black conservative. In other words, she's a victim of Democrat racism on a near daily basis, if not a regular basis. Black conservatives warn reparations are a scheme to gain votes, promised the moon, delivered nothing. It just happened in California. Gavin Newsom. We're going to investigate whether or not the people of California, the Black population of America, do reparations. Then they found out it'd be $800 billion. And, well, we can't do that. And just moved on. And the mainstream media goes, today in the news. And they pointed it another direction. And anybody that was really hacked off about the fact that suddenly the great idea of reparations being paid as spoken about by Gavin Newsom just vaporized, they can't get their story told anywhere. Isn't that interesting? Yeah. So anyway, Black conservatives like Carol Swain, victims of real Democrat racism, and you can see it on The View. Well, it's not racism because the people on The View, the people that are practicing all this racism are Black. Racism is racism. It doesn't make any difference the packaging that it comes from or the packaging it's applied to. Anyway, let's see. Look at the people that are making those promises. Have they come through in the past? Why do you believe them now? The growing demand for reparations to atone for the harms of slavery is being led by politicians at the state and local level in Los Angeles, California, St. Louis, Missouri, Providence, Rhode Island, Asheville, North Carolina. They've all formed commissions to help create reparation pilot programs. Cori Bush has done so on the federal level. I want you to think for just a moment. I want you to think for just one moment. As expensive as reparations are, or would be, is there a scenario where it might be a really, really good investment? In other words, if reparations were paid to essentially people who believe themselves to be descendants of slaves, because it's really going to be hard to prove, is there any way to make that a net positive for the people of the United States? I think there might be. What is it? I'll tell you next. Yeah, that's called the tease. This is the Wells Report. I'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 2 minutes. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will return in 1 minute. The Wells Report returns in 30 seconds. News, analysis, commentary, and debate. This is the Wells Report. Greetings. My name is John David Wells. Thanks for joining us on Friday, the Friday before the Memorial Day weekend. I have news. This broadcast will be taking Memorial Day off. It is one of the most amazing holidays and one of the ones that I care about the most. It may be my second favorite holiday. The first being Thanksgiving. Then Easter. Then Memorial Day. Then Christmas. Then Veterans Day. Yeah, Memorial Day is is a day of sober reflection. It's not necessarily the day that you go out and buy new appliances. Although, as you know, based on the fact that my house was hit by lightning in February, I am buying appliances on the Memorial Day weekend. But I won't be here on Monday. I will see you next Tuesday between 9 and 11 in the morning Central Time. Let me give you a little bit of information here. Greg Hill and Associates is a law firm in Los Angeles and surrounding areas. That firm gives a summary of contributing to the delinquency of a minor in 50 words or less. It is a violation of California Penal Code, Section 272. It requires that the prosecution prove that an adult defendant acted or failed to act, and as a result, a minor became a juvenile delinquent, ward of the juvenile court as a victim, or a habitual truant from school. It is a misdemeanor punishable by up to 364 days in jail and can require sex offender registration, contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Target Corporation has decided that leftist politics, specifically support of the LGBTQIA+ community, is more important than actually having a business. And so what ended up happening is that they came up with this wonderful idea to have gender-bending clothing right in front of everybody as a part of Pride Month that they were celebrating. And then they said, no, wait a minute, we're going to have to move all that stuff to the back of the store. We're going to have to move all that stuff to the back of the store, and because we're worried about the safety of our team members. And I said, a few years ago, you opened up women's restrooms to biological males. Were you worried about your team member safety then? Were you worried about your customers' safety then? No. And you'd figure that they would learn based on the amazing amount of money that they lost because of that. Nope. This is being reported by Fox News. It's biased. Fox News. I don't know whether this article is. Target Corporation is partnering with a K-12 education group for which focuses on getting districts to adopt policies that will keep parents in the dark on their child's in-school gender transition, providing sexually explicit books to schools for free, and integrating gender ideology at all levels of curriculum in public schools. This according to Fox News Digital. GLSEN leads the movement in creating, affirming, and anti-racist spaces for LGBTQIA+ students. We are proud of our 10-plus years of collaboration with GLSEN and continue to support that mission, says Target. The retail giant provides annual donations to GLSEN. GLSEN calls for gender ideology to be integrated into all classes, even mathematics. It provides educators instructions on how they can make math more inclusive of trans and non-binary identities by including they, them pronouns in word problems. Oh, that'll do it. Oh, yeah. In another example, GLSEN recommends that teachers intervene if students are making graphs about sex and gender to ensure it includes the ideology supported by GLSEN. Okay, I'll bite. What does GLSEN stand for? Being as how they haven't necessarily brought it up in this article. Let's see. Oh, here we go. The Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network. Gay and lesbian, I get. Straight Education Network? Have you heard anything being reported so far that that sounds straight to you? I haven't heard it. Anyway, let's see. When students create their own surveys, they want to make sure that that teachers intervene if students make graphs about sex and gender to include the ideology supported by GLSEN. Students are creating their own surveys. If they want to include data for biological sex, teachers need to be sure they include both intersex and other choices. which is another great way of defining intersex and other choices for all the kids in the classroom. It's a lever to put out LGBTQIA plus ideology and agenda items. What if you don't want your kid to be exposed to that? Sit down and shut up and let the teachers teach. The teachers or GLSEN? The teachers or the teachers union? The teachers or the people that may be guilty to contributing to the delinquency of a minor? Well, how does that happen, John David? Well, you know where it talks about becoming wards of the juvenile system? Let's say GLSEN is successful. And let's say that they are able to convince a school district that kids ought to be able to change their gender without their parents' knowledge. Let's say that that happens. Okay? So now what we have is we have someone who is going to put themselves between parents and children. And they're going to do so based on sexual content. So what does that do? It blows up the relationship between the child and the parents. Say, for example, that's happened in other states. Child Protective Services gets involved. The child is removed as a ward of the court. That's putting somebody into the juvenile detention system. That's contributing to the delinquency of a minor. And in this particular case, should these people, and I'm asking this question, I'm not saying this is not a rhetorical question to make a point. Should these people be charged with and determined to be sex offenders? Should they be sex offenders? So, GLSEN also spotlighted recommendations from a teacher who discussed incorporating gender ideology into science. It took me 3 years of teaching middle school science before feeling comfortable enough to come out to my students as a trans man. What difference does it make? Does it make any difference whether you're a trans man? Which is more important to you, that your students know that you're a trans man or that you're teaching the children? We were starting a unit focused on how identity impacts the practice of science, including the ways that specific groups are marginalized by normative ideas. What's that doing in a science class? Aren't we plotting the cooling curve of paradichlorobenzene in this class? Why are we talking about marginalized people, specific groups, and how identity impacts the practice of science? Science has nothing to do with identity. Science has everything to do with fact. That is the problem. That is one of the problems in this right there. So she's trying to teach this gobbledygook to her kids in the science class. In the introduction to that particular unit, I shared my personal experience of the ways that trans people are often erased by language and used by science and medical professionals to describe bodies, patients, and health practices. This as opposed to convincing people to change their bodies. Physically altering them forever, rendering them inert for all intents and purposes. Is that contributing to the delinquency of a minor? You know, I think it might be. I think it just might be. Do you think that these people ought to be sex offenders? And once again, here's a perfect example of why people are taking their kids, as we started with this earlier in the broadcast. This is why people are homeschooling their children. It's a science class, right? Well, we're starting a unit focused on how identity impacts the practice of science. Excuse me? Are you teaching science? Or are you teaching the uses of science in a political world? Is that political science or is that science? That's political science. To date, the retail giant has donated $2.1 million to GLSEN, which offers districts and students guidance on how to hide gender transition from parents, contributing to the delinquency of a minor. For example, its policy for districts said the local education agency, whatever district, shall ensure that all personally identified and medical information regarding transgender and non-binary students be kept confidential. Staff or educators shall not disclose any information that may reveal a student's gender identity to others, including parents or a guardian. It's contributing to the delinquency of a minor. It's interfering with families. It's attempted kidnapping. It is surgical experimentation on kids. It is monstrous. It is awful. Years ago, everybody was worried about female circumcision in that disgusting group of people known as the Taliban. My God. At least the women were female at the end of that horrifying procedure. It's nothing compared to gender reassignment surgery. What are these people talking about? It's contributing to the delinquency of a minor. They should be charged with that. You can get up to 364 days in jail in California because this was a California law firm. They should spend every single one of those days there. Then they should be categorized as a sex offender. And all this would stop. Just like that. You know, I don't care what you do in the privacy of your own thoughts. I don't care what you do with your body. But trying to convince kids to chop up their bodies, rearrange them for the sake of your political ideology, is evil. And you should go to prison for it. Just my opinion. But boy, if you think otherwise, if you believe otherwise, give me a call. Explain to me why I'm getting this wrong. Explain to me how I'm being transphobic. I'm not being transphobic. I'm protecting my kids. I'm protecting my kids from monsters that want to take them down a road that will render them reproductively inert for the sake of their politics and nothing more. What's human experimentation? What's medical human experimentation in search of some political basis? Is that ringing a bell to anybody else? That's ringing a bell. Somehow there's something back there. There's what was that? Oh yeah, Joseph Mengele during the Third Reich, the Nazi regime. Medical experimentation on humans. And that's what we're doing here in the United States. All for the sake of LGBTQIA+. You individuals trying to hide behind this paper-thin, easily rupturable shield of, well, you're just transphobic. Yeah? Well, the bulldozer that I drive over your entire endeavor and bury you in a prison for at least a year and make it possible for you to render yourself a sex offender. But don't worry, we'll keep it from your parents. That bulldozer's transphobic too, I guess. And everybody's wrong except you, huh? And Target blames its customers for disagreeing with it. Why do you shop there? I'll never shop at Target again. Ever. Why would I? You're listening to the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. It makes me want to vomit, actually. contributing to the delinquency of a minor. This is the Wells Report. We'll be back with more coming up in just a moment. You're listening to the Wells Report, which will be back in 4 minutes. This is the Wells Report, which will return in 3 minutes. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. As I said earlier, this broadcast will not be seen on Monday because it's Memorial Day. So I'll see you next Tuesday. In the meantime, have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And remember, the people who made it possible for us to have these wonderful, wonderful weekends in this nation. The people that gave the last full measure of devotion. In other words, they gave their lives for this nation. They traveled around the world because we so far in the United States have been lucky that we don't have to fight in our towns and villages and countryside. We go to other countries and fight on their countryside, villages, and towns. Something tells me at some point that may change, but let's just assume that that's not going to be the case. While everything I say about the Texas State Guard is just my own opinion, it has nothing to do with the Texas Military Department or the Texas State Guard, but as a serving Texas State Guardsman, I serve with people prepared to give that last full measure. I have known people who have given that last full measure. and the people that are left behind to tell their stories. Say them in stark terms. You're wearing our uniform. I've seen people die in that uniform for the sake of this nation. You're going to wear it properly. Yeah. In memory of them. This nation is a collection of ideologies, beliefs, races, creeds, colors, origins. E pluribus unum. All have come together to defend this refuge of freedom and liberty for the sake of freedom and liberty. It is under attack from enemies, foreign and domestic, at every turn. Whether you see it or not, whether you know it or not. The nation is under attack. Most times, that attack occurs in minor skirmishes as benign as a conversation at a school board meeting. But the valor required to have an opposing viewpoint, a brilliant argument, the valor to stand and deliver, is, while certainly not giving the last full measure of devotion, something that can put you under the gaze of the FBI in this country, and therefore is valorous. The work that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Space Force members, Coast Guardsmen, the work they do is essential. Orwell said it the best. We sleep in our beds comfortable at night, thanks to the work of rough men in the dark and women. That's not the exact quote. It's a paraphrase, but it's close enough. Close enough for government work, as we say. Someone in your family has given the last full measure. Someone you knows somebody who gave the last full measure. Remember those people this weekend. Not just once, but every day of the weekend. In your prayers before dinner tonight, thank those people who lay in cemeteries around the world, perfectly curated by the people who thank them every day for coming to their country and saving them from despair and ruin, and instead exchange their lives for freedom and liberty. Remember those people. Remember them in your prayers. Today, people are going to be out at the National Cemetery in Arlington, not just Arlington, D.C., Washington, D.C., but Arlington, Texas. And they will be out there placing flags in front of the tombstones of the people that gave, in most cases, the last full measure of devotion. Walk in those gardens of stone. Revel in the freedom and liberty that gives you the opportunity to just get in your car and go. Honor the people who gave it to you. Memorial Day. This is the Wells Report. My name is John David Wells. Our telephone number is 817-379-2172. If you want to write me a letter, if you want to say something to me in an email, the email address is thewellsreport@frontier.com. In the subject line, tell me what platform you saw this broadcast on, so I know it's you. God bless you and your endeavors. God bless my brothers and sisters in the United States military, those that are with us, and those that are not. By all means, have a wonderful weekend. If you have to buy an appliance, don't beat yourself up for it. But remember those who gave this to you. This has been the Wells Report. All righty then. I got to go. Like I said, I'm not going to be here on Monday. I'll be here on Tuesday. So God bless all y'all, and I'll talk to you later. I'm serious about that prayer thing. Prayer for those